Welcome to the Front Chronicle channel. Today is May 2nd, and many significant events have occurred in the last 24 hours. Before we begin the review, I would like to thank everyone who has already subscribed to the channel. Your support gives us the opportunity to develop further. If you are here for the first time, be sure to subscribe. It helps a lot. And now let's move on to an analysis of the current situation on the contact line. Let's start traditionally with the Sumy direction. Quite noticeable changes have been observed there over the last 24 hours. First, a brief political context. Recently it became known about the conclusion of a certain agreement, which in some circles is being presented as a success for Kiev, but in reality it looks more like a political concession. There is no talk of ending hostilities. The summer phase of the conflict has apparently begun and will gain momentum. A ceasefire is possible only closer to autumn, but this is also questionable. Active hostilities are currently ongoing, and we, together with you, continue to monitor the development of the situation. Let's move on to the map. Frankly speaking, I am personally very impressed by what has been unfolding in the last 4 or 5 days. The losses of positions that we are currently seeing from the Ukrainian armed forces are extremely rare, if not unprecedented, in the entire time that I have been monitoring the operational situation. Today was especially indicative, and you will now understand why. So I advise you to watch it to the end. So, in the Sumy area, the active advance of Russian units continues. Over the past 24 hours, we have managed to expand the control zone between Vesyolovka and Zhuravka. Moreover, there was a breakthrough towards Bogate. Russian forces entered the settlement and advanced deep into the residential sector. The overall advance, judging by the map, was more than 3 kilometers. This is a significant figure, especially if you remember that such rates were previously recorded extremely rarely, maybe once a week, and even then, not consistently. And that's not all. In total, in 24 hours, we managed to expand the controlled territory on this section of the front by about 5 square kilometers. Street fighting is currently ongoing in the very center of Belov, and attempts are being made to advance in the direction of the settlement of Vodolagi. The Ukrainian armed forces are clearly experiencing difficulties here, while the Russian army is acting quite confidently. We are moving to the Lyman direction. Here, the situation is also not in favor of the Ukrainian side. The day before, there was a breakthrough by Russian assault groups, which were able to advance north of the previous lines by another kilometer. The front here has expanded to a section about 2 kilometers wide. However, a much more impressive event took place on the left bank of the Zherebets. There, Russian mobile groups, using light equipment, ATVs, buggies and motorcycles, made a rapid breakthrough from the Empolovka area and were able to wedge into Torskoye. At the same time, the Ukrainian defensive order was disrupted, which allowed them to advance 600 to 700 meters into the settlement. The total breakthrough in this area was over 4 kilometers, and the captured territory was about 4 square kilometers. To summarize, in just 2 directions, Sumy and Lymansky, at least 10 square kilometers came under control in 24 hours. This is a serious result, especially considering that the drawdown in the Torskoye area may entail the need for Ukrainian units to withdraw from the Serebryansky forestry. In parallel with this, actions are being carried out along the Seversko-Donetsk Canal, which also creates an unfavorable situation for the defenders. Now we move to the Pokrovsk direction. An important event took place here. The Ukrainian armed forces units were forced to leave Novoyelenovka. Moreover, this is confirmed even by Ukrainian sources. We are talking about the advance of Russian troops by 5 kilometers. Yesterday, there were already reports of contacts near the reservoir in this area, but they remained unconfirmed. However, by lunchtime it became known that Russian forces entered the southern part of the village, causing panic among the Ukrainian garrison. The reason for such a rapid withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces is said to be the use of a large number of FPV drones. But as we understand, this is not a unique situation. Drones are actively used in all areas of the front. Obviously, in this case, the Ukrainian units were simply not ready for such pressure. According to the latest data, the village has completely come under Russian control, although on some maps it is still shown as partially held by the Ukrainian armed forces. The next logical step is an offensive on Yablonovka with access to Oleksandr Kalinov, an important supply hub. In case of successful advancement, the entire Ukrainian contingent south of this line will be under threat. It is also worth noting the intensification of actions in the entire Pokrovsk direction. Even Ukrainian analysts admit that the intensity of the fighting here has increased sharply. A particularly memorable advance took place on the approaches to Pokrovsk itself. Yesterday evening, it became known that Russian assault groups entered the outskirts of the city for the first time. Not reconnaissance groups, but full-fledged units. Video footage from the Ukrainian side confirms the fact of fighting for the southern neighborhoods. At the moment, Russian forces have consolidated their positions in several buildings in the south of the city. There are reports of preparations to introduce reserves to expand control. Thus, it can be considered that from May 1st, the phase of fighting directly for the city of Pokrovsk officially began. Not for the suburbs, but for the city itself. This is an important stage. Let's move on to the section of the front near the village of Bogate. There is also progress here. In one day, they managed to take up to 2 kilometers on a section of the same width. According to sources, street fighting began in Bogate itself. Before the assault, a powerful artillery preparation was carried out, including airstrikes. It is reported that in one day alone, 11 guided aerial bombs were dropped. This may indicate an intention to carry out a quick cleanup, although everything depends on the readiness of the enemy's defense. Final count for the day: 5 square kilometers, Sumy direction, 5 square kilometers, Pokrovskoye, 5 square kilometers, Lymanskoye, 5 square kilometers, Bogatyrsky section, plus individual local advances, a total of at least 21 square kilometers per day. This is twice the average daily rate of advance of the Russian army in recent months. The reasons for the acceleration, according to analysts, are related to the so-called greenery. The spring foliage makes visual observation difficult and facilitates more effective covert advancement of infantry. Now it is worth asking the question, how will the declared 3-day ceasefire affect these events? Personally, I am inclined to believe that a pause in hostilities may slow down the pace a little, and it may take some time to ramp up the intensity again. However, if it really allows us to avoid losses among Russian fighters, then such a pause is justified. It has become clear that the pause in the advancement of the Russian army in the Pokrovsk direction was a temporary operational respite, and not the result of the actions of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command, in particular Drapatoy. Video materials with confirmed geolocation have been published on the internet, proving the presence of assault groups of the Russian armed forces within Pokrovsk, all the way to Pavel Popovich Street. Ukrainian resources present this as the work of a sabotage and reconnaissance group, which allegedly left after a short sortie. However, the very fact of their presence proves that the defense on the third final line of the Ukrainian resistance line has actually been breached. This result became possible after the elite Ukrainian units hastily left the fortifications east of Zverevo. According to eyewitnesses, the successful advance of Russian fighters was ensured by cable-controlled drones. After which, light motorized infantry units on motorcycles quickly broke into the settlement, causing disorganization and panic among the enemy, who retreated without looking back. According to information from Ukrainian observers with access to the real situation in the troops, video footage of reprisals and executions, regularly broadcast online, greatly demoralized the Ukrainian armed forces fighters, especially those who, according to sources, are under the influence of drugs that enhance suggestibility. These images frighten Ukrainian soldiers so much that they do everything they can to avoid direct clashes in order to avoid being captured. According to reports, the settlement of Zverevo is indeed under the control of the 41st Army. It is highly likely that the Russian Defense Ministry will issue an official confirmation in the near future. The assault on Pokrovsk that has begun is accompanied by massive artillery strikes, the activity of UAV operators, and the participation of aviation, which is a sign of the beginning of a full-scale operation to seize the city. Some analysts from the Ukrainian side report that the situation of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Pokrovsk area has significantly worsened over the past 48 hours. Reconnaissance units of the Russian group Center have penetrated the outer quarters of the city. Although it is too early to talk about a full-scale battle for Pokrovsk, the Ukrainian side has apparently lost control over areas north of Shevchenko Street. Thus, the attack maneuver of the Ukrainian forces, which tried to break through to the southern outskirts and push back the Russian units, also failed. Despite loud statements about the offensive, the losses of the Ukrainian attackers were significant. The Ukrainian media are silent about this episode, preferring to focus on abstract successes. The military leaders of the Ukrainian armed forces addressed foreign journalists with complaints about difficult weather conditions, dense vegetation, the actions of Russian motorcyclists, and the effective work of electronic warfare and drones. At the same time, attempts continue to present the situation as catastrophic for Russian troops, who allegedly lost millions of soldiers, which coincides with the rhetoric of official Kyiv. Meanwhile, the Russian army continues active operations on the northern and southern approaches to Pokrovsk. In the direction of Novo-Olenovka, the advance of motorized rifle units has been recorded, which cleared the settlement and drove out Ukrainian formations from there. Independent analysts record an advance of 5 kilometers. In general, the situation in the northwest of the Donetsk region is not in favor of the Ukrainian army. The northern encirclement of Pokrovsk, known as the right flank of the Krasnoarmeyskaya offensive operation, is also part of the Konstantinovsky direction. In 3 days, Russian troops have consolidated a number of key positions and occupied significant forest areas up to Novolyanovka, more than half of which is already under the control of the Russian Federation. The advance continued to the west, where the dam and bridge on the N32 highway were captured, as well as a system of trenches that allowed Russian forces to disrupt communications between Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka. This operation is reminiscent of the sharp advance on Selidovo after the successful offensive near Ocheretino. Significant changes are also recorded south of Pokrovsk. New positions south of Uspanovka came under Russian control, and assault groups entered Novo-Alexandrovka, advancing from the south. This creates the preconditions for encircling Ukrainian units holding positions in the area of Udakny and the so-called Kotlina. Ukrainian defense in the south is also showing signs of degradation. One of the Ukrainian observers with a sharply anti-Russian position stated that the defense in the so-called Constantinople is collapsing, and the direction should be temporarily renamed Bogatirskoye. This emphasizes the weakness of Ukrainian positions in this sector. According to him, the road between Constantinople and Bogate has long been under targeted fire from Russian systems, which makes it unsuitable for supplies. In the area of Alexeyevka, the intensity of fighting reaches its maximum, and Russian units are trying to gain a foothold on the eastern outskirts. Successes are also recorded in the direction of Otradnoye. Although this zone is under the responsibility of the Vostok Group and strategically is part of the Novopavlovsky district, many Ukrainian experts admit that Russia's main goal for 2025 is to capture Pokrovsk. If we consider the overall picture from Bogate to Novo-Olenovka, Ukrainian forces are retreating in almost all areas. This allows us to conclude that the pause, previously perceived as a consequence of the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces, was in fact a planned regrouping, ensuring preparation for the next stage of the offensive operation.